I think this is a very useful, important discussion where the details and the numbers exactly aren't as important as the trends, the drivers, but a few details also do matter. Because if you hear a sort of phrase like renewables are cheaper than coal, always start with the lesson I give my students. The answer to any policy complex question is it depends. Of course, we have to figure out what it depends on and get the details right. So I'll take the 15, 20 minutes to go through a bunch of slides. A lot of points have been covered, so I'm going to skim a few, and hopefully you can I'll send my slides to disseminate for folks for the details. Some of the key sort of thoughts towards this space are: what does it look like? Is India different? And India is different because it's huge. It's the second most populous country in the world. And then how do we improve this transition to be faster, cheaper, and to use the phrase just? Because in the IT world, there is a famous phrase: cheaper, faster, better. Pick any two. So what about trade-offs? So first point is there are multiple transitions and transformations underway. It is not only decarbonization, but we've got changes in transport where we're moving away from liquid fossil fuels. Maybe there's a push towards natural gas, maybe hydrogen eventually. May not just be electrification. The grid of the future is a big shift. It's more decentralized than ever before, and it is also going to be much more digital. There's changing role of consumers who are very key. Number of our panelists talked about quality or what does the consumer want. So how do you make them prosumers, producer consumers? And we also have shifts in regulation. There's been a rise of attempts to move towards markets. Now, of course, markets are not a panacea. They signal if moves towards efficiency, but they don't solve equity problems necessarily. But all of these transitions look different in different places in the world. The time constants vary both by country and application. This is a snapshot from Niti Aayog's dashboard. I believe it was created by our friends at Prayas. 2015 data, but the large shapes haven't changed much. A little bit of the numbers have changed. And this is the total energy in India. You notice a couple of salient points. First is coal is huge. It's the dominant. We still import some. Second, a lot of our oil is imported. Third, electricity dominates. So most of our energy gets converted into electricity. Of course, electricity is inefficient, so not all of it gets converted into electricity from primary energy. And lastly, notice that transport is very small. Buildings are very low, relatively speaking. And 2019, the primary energy was 13.7% higher than these numbers, while GDP was over a third higher. So clearly we're getting and exceeding, in fact, our target rate for the Paris commitments. So the larger question that becomes is how soon can we ratchet that up? So how are developing countries different? Clearly, they're low in energy consumption. Look at any data on per capita. But the important point for the transition is that many other countries, especially Western Europe or the US and OECD, have saturation. They have energy for all. Not only do they have energy for all, they have sufficient or more than sufficient energy for all. So in a 30-year net zero horizon that people talk about, that's less than 3% per annum, which is close to the stock turnover rate in terms of devices, equipment, infrastructure, etc. Of course, some infrastructure large has a longer lifespan. Developing regions still have an enormous growth ahead. Our per capita consumption is scarcely over 1,000 kilowatt hours per capita consumption, not generation. And yet the world average is closer to 4,000. The good news, and we saw that from India, is there's a high share of electricity in a lot of developing regions. Many are warm climates. China is an outlier, but look at Africa, look at India, East Asia. We have very little heating requirements. So that's a good thing. So that also makes decarbonization easier because decarbonizing electricity is far easier than decarbonizing many other segments of the uh, electricity system. We also have a high population share in agriculture. Thomas talked about jobs very eloquently. We're also low on the rungs of the energy ladder. We have electrified now at a household level, but quality still remains a challenge. So if we just simplify, maybe overgeneralize, price matters. There's less money to go around. Social welfare redistribution is a typical aspect of most energy policy. We have subsidies and cross subsidies. However, they are very different than you would think necessarily. Fossil fuels are not subsidized on average nearly as much you would think. In some ways, they are actually non subsidized because they pay very high tax rates. Look at liquid fuels, petrol, you pay more in taxes than you do for the petrol. Coal, it we'll get to in some more detail. Pollution's a concern, access is a priority, and domestic, which are usually cheaper and secure in some ways, take priority. So that's why India and China use a lot of coal. So we have a recent book out 2, 3 months ago, Future of Coal in India. It's a multi-year deep dive, and this really gets into the heart of what's happening with coal, including the transition of towards RE. The historical coal consumption around the world has this trend since 1980. And notice India, the blue line, is relatively low on a per capita basis. Many countries have come down. The UK has come down dramatically. Uh, this is Germany has come down dramatically, but they're still much higher. And so the area under the curve, which is one important point for carbon because of its cumulative nature, is something to keep in mind. Now, this isn't about apportioning blame, but just looking at the time scales of trajectory. Thomas showed, you know, UK was 100% electricity from carbon. It took decades to go away from that. So if we look at coal in India, the per capita consumption is the second highest in the world. Sorry, not per capita, the total is second highest in the world. But the per capita consumption now immediately starts to look lower. And then if we look at this fourth column, because the calorific value of Indian coal is low, the energy content, which is a proxy for carbon emissions, a lot of our coal is ash, is actually roughly half. These are 2019 numbers of the world average. And now you look at the share of primary energy from coal, it's about half in both India and China. So coal is a very big deal. So just saying let's get rid of coal means there's more shock to the economy. Thomas's graph didn't show coal in the economy, it showed coal in electricity. Well, if you take, for example, the United States, it's just 12% coal. They still use a lot of natural gas and oil for transport and for heating and industrial use, these other fossil fuels. So India doesn't use as much fossil fuels, relatively speaking, as many of the other countries. So that is a very big deal. And in some ways, it's good news from a decarbonization transition. You've seen some of the numbers from Shikuma. The electricity and coal are deeply intertwined. Most of our coal goes to electricity. This is the capacity for power in India. The most of the growth is now in green renewable energy. Coal grew very rapidly. So the demand for electricity between 11 and 16 grew at about 6.6%, while the capacity of coal power plants grew at 14.5% between 11 and 16. So this is the real reason for the fall in the plant load factors that we heard about from coal. It is not entirely due to RE. RE's share has certainly gone up, but it's still only about 10% of generation. The big issue is not can we grow RE, but how do we handle it from a grid perspective? So time of day really matters. We run a website called carbontracker.in, and this is last year, March, time of day by source. Notice that coal is relatively flat. Here is the renewables. And you also notice that the yellow is the renewable. And you notice that the peak for the absolute peak is in the evening every day when renewables contribution is quite low. So that is one of the key challenges. A traditional lens on how we think of RE versus coal has been coal is getting more expensive, RE is getting cheaper, they cross over. According to some people, it's already happened. So RE bids are now down to 2 rupees a kilowatt hour. New coal, not that anyone's building any, could be closer to 4 rupees a kilowatt hour. more if you're far away from the pit head. But transportation is a very big component of coal variable cost. Of course, on the other hand, today we're not pricing in the externalities of coal. But on the other hand, RE is ignoring the system level costs. These are only the levelized costs of energy for variable RE, meaning take it when the sun shines or when the wind blows. We must also be very cautious of comparing generator versus retail costs. One of the earlier slides talked of what consumers pay for retail, industrial, residential, and here's how you can buy RE. You can actually get RE for two, two and a half, three, maybe three and a half for rooftop four, which is always going to be cheaper than the retail price of electricity, because retail is paying for the last mile infrastructure, the resiliency, the backup, and all of the above. So you have to be cautious when making that comparison. Certainly the trend is getting more competitive, but it's not anywhere near there. So we sort of think of this as a ladder of competitiveness instead of those simplified crossover. The first step of competition is looking at total costs for VRE, the levelized cost of energy. You want to essentially avoid building a new coal power plant. And yes, why would you build a new coal power plant? Part of the issue is we are surplus in coal already. But the second issue is in the short run, we can absorb a lot of RE just by backing down other sources of coal for any growth that's more than the growth in demand. So this is the first step, and it's very easy. Now we will displace an existing coal plant at the margin. We're not talking capital cost, just the coal variable cost. And this crossover depends heavily on location. If you're at the pit head today, you can have generation from an efficient plant at around 1.5 rupees a kilowatt hour. The average marginal cost of NTPC across its fleet is about 2 rupees a kilowatt hour. So that should tell us that RE doesn't compete as easily as some people might think. Then, of course, when you go from variable RE, you have to start moving towards firm power. Let's maybe not call it base load, but firm power. And now you have to add storage and then compare that. The first rung is compare that for total costs. And then the hardest would be if you're displacing an existing coal plant in the evening using a combination of RE and storage. Now here, unfortunately, the details do matter. If we do a first principles calculation of what does RE and storage cost, for the two parameters that matter the most are what does your battery cost you and how much battery do you need. So this is going between no RE, which is zero, which is no battery, which means you're just taking RE at say 2.75 rupees a kilowatt hour, or 100% of that RE going through a battery. So that's the blended cost or weighted average cost that this graph shows. And at a reference number of $100 a kilowatt hour, we are not there yet. You have to remember most BNEF numbers are pack level. They exclude the inverter, they exclude other costs. So total capex, if you have 100, we are over 200 today in India, closer to 300 as of last year from Indian developer numbers for battery. You see that the total weighted average cost is not 2 or 3, it's much, much higher. So even in the future, you're talking 5 rupees range when it comes down from RE blended with modest amount of battery. So these bids that are out there today, these RTC bids, these real-time uh, supply round the clock, are not true indicators of storage costs because the quantum of storage that these have is quite modest. The good news is we're nowhere near needing high levels of storage. In fact, we don't need much at all. We can absorb it in current grid, but we're only a few years away when we will need storage. We'll run out of this surplus of coal, and then we will need new capacity to meet the evening peak demand. The fundamentals of RE, this is stuff that others have spoken about in the past. As RE grows, its marginal cost of integration rises and its marginal value declines. And we don't have proper signaling for this. We in fact have static power purchase agreements that further distort the picture. Coal, from a political economy perspective, is a very complex ecosystem, and the problem is structural. We have distortions at mining level, Who mines? Public versus private? What is the mechanism for getting the rights to mine? Are you paying for an auction? That's expensive. While if you are Coal India or a PSU, you can get free allocation to mining or at notified nominal prices. Now, are you selling it under a, are you selling the coal at a fuel supply agreement, or is it based on imports or auctions like e-auctions or Shakti? What are the levies that everyone pays? These are mostly uniform across types of stakeholders, but you may get a carbon tax. How do you transport it? This is a very big deal. So Indian Railways turns out to be very expensive, which effectively means long distance, which effectively means state-owned power plants because they're in the state, which by definition are not pithead for many states, are the furthest away, and they not only pay cost of transportation, they end up paying a cross subsidy, which I'll highlight in a few seconds. And then you have distortions on power sale mechanisms. So it's very misleading to say, let me get a power market if I don't have a coal market to get liquidity to encourage efficiency in this system. This is a slice of the value chain of delivered coal total for CIL. This is total CIL. It has three main components. What is the miner cost? What is the railways cost, which is taken not for all transport, but all transport that goes through the railways. And then you've got levies, which include the coal cess. And note that the railways cost for 6 through 17, 11 years has been growing dramatically, while the levies, like the coal cess, has gone up dramatically. So you now pay, and then you've got Coal India, whose prices were actually relatively flat for some years. So out of Coal India, their dividend is paid back into the government. Levies, by definition, go back to society, and a third of the railways costs actually go back as cross subsidy to passengers. So the passenger fare to freight ratio, I'm just going to dig into a little bit on the railways because it's one of several key issues we have to figure out a solution to. Fare to freight ratio is a measure of pricing of passenger fares or freight. So by being a ratio, we ignore costs of living or absolute numbers. All countries pretty much have a fare to freight ratio that's close to 1, if not higher. Few developing countries have lower. Look at where India is. Because we explicitly overcharge all freight, coal is the largest freight, and coal's rates are higher than the average for freight. So we're overcharging coal to pay for passengers of railway, even if we got rid of all cross subsidies between freight and passengers, which is more than the coal, you'd still have a fare to freight ratio that's only 0.71. So what has happened is power plants have seen a faster reduction in revenues to the railways than overall coal. So your total revenues are a function of your price, distance, and volume. So lead or distance for coal has fallen, while for power plants, it has fallen even faster. This is due to two reasons. One, you've had what's called a rationalization of linkages, which is a good thing, but you also have a structural shift where the PLFs or plant load factors of pithead plants has gone up, while the plant load factors of distant plants has gone down. Now ask yourself, where is the RE in India? The RE in India is disproportionately in West India and South India. So this transition is hitting the railways faster than it's hitting Coal India. So the coal power plants, going to thermal power plants, not total coal, you've had a tonnage that has plateaued. You've had a ton kilometers that is relatively flat, but your lead has gone down. So the only way the railways has managed is because it kept raising the price of transportation for coal power plants. What does this mean? In 2017, this is the transportation cost for a representative power plant across India. So you're paying up to 2 rupees a kilowatt hour in transportation, of which about a third is paying for passengers. And this situation is only getting worse as the coal volumes are plateauing, the leads are falling, the PLF spread between pithead and non-pithead India. Now, this is also where your renewables are. So that is the fundamental, one of the fundamental challenges India needs to resolve as part of its transition. We have many other distortions. We've already heard extensively on the discoms. Coal has a cess of 400 rupees a ton, which is about 3 rupees a ton uh, carbon dioxide, which is about 25 paise. So if I had, hypothetically, not going to happen anytime soon, $40 a ton CO2 as a carbon tax, that is 3 rupees a kilowatt hour. Quite substantial, and that may bridge us to storage even in short-term prices. But it also means that $40 a ton isn't enough to make us shift towards gas, because gas is not fossil free. So your savings on this are only about 1.4 rupees a kilowatt hour. You still have some fossil carbon implications. On the other hand, we have to be careful of RE support mechanisms. I'm very wary of support that goes to the rich. For example, 30% capex subsidy for rooftop solar. Who has the roof? Who's got the electricity tariff slab that is high enough to incentivize it? It's the rich. We also have other sort of issues that have to be worked out. CEA had estimated system level costs of RE well over a rupee, but it's debatable what the true costs are. It's a very complicated calculation. Bottom line, coal isn't going away anytime soon. Even if we don't add any more coal power plants, about half the electricity, more than that as per official CEA numbers, is still going to be coal in 2030. So we need to clean it up. And efficiency is the low-hanging fruit, because that not only helps carbon, but it also helps air pollution as well. What do we need to improve this trajectory? We need to improve our signaling and the feedback loops, like time of day pricing. That is going to incentivize not only batteries, but also smart grid demand response, energy efficiency, all of the above. I would love to buy clean electricity as an end consumer. I'm willing to pay a small premium. I can't get it. So we need maybe soft paternalism that makes it easier to do the right thing, to buy cleaner power, to buy cleaner transport, etc. Co-benefits is a big chunk of what India may need, because carbon is too nebulous for many people to buy into. We need resilience if you use that lens. Cheap finance. Jobs is a big deal. Thomas already talked about this issue, that people going out of farming is much higher problem. It's 50 times a bigger deal, if not 70, 80 times bigger deal than the jobs out of coal. Finance. One lesson from the global space: lack of finance is not our bottleneck. Finance will always be available if the returns make sense. But risk is the bottleneck. People have talked about, hey, the clean transition is, we just need to get financing, sorry, it went the other way, from sovereign funds, pension funds, because they're willing to get 1, 2, 3% rates of return instead of our costs of capital. The problem is not just your foreign exchange hedge, but sovereign funds want governance, predictability, and returns in that order. Every time they see these worries about PPA renegotiation, because people are scared that renewable of today is cheaper than renewable of the past, so let me now just renegotiate the old renewables. Every time you get a bid of 2 rupees a kilowatt hour, that puts pressure on people saying, wait, then why am I paying 3.5 or 4 rupees for green power? That's also green power. So where India may be focused is looking at a plateau instead of net zero. I think it's premature for India to pledge a net zero. Certainly it has to work towards it. We should also look subnationally. The things that will matter are price curves of alternatives, including storage, policy frameworks. Are we, forget carbon pricing, but even getting externalities like pollution priced properly? And how does the finance look like? This just transition will have a cost. We'll have to find the money. Germany has talked about earmarking $45 billion. I forget, was that euros or dollars, for the just transition? So we need all the stakeholders to get aligned. Maybe we need a new one. Build Back Better was one that's there globally. Green New Deal, of course, just transition. What does this what will this look like so more people can get on board faster? Because I think that point made by Soumya was very key. We're doing a lot. India is actually doing more than its fair share, and even then it's not enough. Thank you.